Welcome back to another episode of the Meal Prep Monday podcast. I'm your host and founder of Prep Dish, Allison Schaaf. Today, we are back with another interview with Dr. Darin Ingels. He is an expert on Lyme disease. He wrote the book called The Lyme Solution. He also partnered with me to create some specialty meal plans that are the Alkaline diet. We're going to get into that in today's interview. If you are curious, so these meal plans are not a part of our weekly subscription. They're actually on, so it's prepdish.com/shop. If you want to see the specialty plans that we offer, these are kind of one-time purchase plans, everything from entertaining menus to AIP, and then these alkaline diet menus that I partnered with Dr. Ingels on. I pulled one up so you can hear some of the menu items. Let me see. So there is a mushroom and zucchini lasagna, a marinated flank steak with potatoes and spinach, a cauliflower and apple soup. We even have dessert options. It's a baked apple with raisins and almonds on this week. So if you want to check those out, I will make sure those are linked in the show notes. Excited for you guys to listen in to today's episode with Dr. Ingels. Let's get into it. Hi, and welcome back to the Meal Prep Monday podcast. Today, I am here with Dr. Ingels and excited to talk about the alkaline diet. Hi, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Oh, it's nice to see you, Allison.
So, little history. Gosh, how many years ago was it? We worked together on some alkaline diet meal plans, and am excited for this opportunity for you to speak more eloquently than I can about the alkaline diet and what everyone needs to know about that. Before we get into that part of the interview, though, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Sure. I'm a naturopathic doctor by training. I practice out in Laguna Hills, California, and I've been practicing for almost 25 years. My practice is primarily focused around environmental medicine. I was fortunate after a residency to have trained with the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. In fact, we just had our meeting in San Antonio, Texas, just down the road from you last week. But as an extension of that, it really applies to all the things in the world that impact our health coming from the environment. And in that, I see a lot of people with Lyme disease. I see a lot of kids with autism. I work with a lot of people with autoimmune disease. So, the alkaline diet kind of came out of my own experience as being a Lyme patient and finding, what foods seem to work for me, what foods seem to help heal my body, what foods are anti-inflammatory. And, that's really kind of what led me to you, learning that you create these, fabulous meal plans for people. And when my book was coming out, so that was the book came out in 2018. So I think we must have connected in 2017 to have your team, start working on that. But it's really been so helpful for so many of my patients, people who read my book, as a way to use food as medicine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for always being a supporter of Prep Dish. And it's funny, over the past 7 years, I always see you sending people our way to use the meal plans and always appreciate that. So tell me a little bit more, what is the alkaline diet? Like, what actually is involved with it?
Sure. This is really nothing new. Alkaline diet's been around for decades. And if you go back, you'll find books written in the 50s and 60s talking about this. Mm-hmm. And the essence of it is that when you eat food and it breaks down in your body, it can make your cells acidic, it can make them alkaline, or it can kind of be neutral. And if you look at cell physiology, your cells function best generally at an alkaline pH. Mm-hmm. So if you look at your body physiologically, your skin, your stomach, your bladder, and for women, the vaginal area, those are very acidic. That's really to help protect against outside invaders. But if you look at the rest of your body, your blood's slightly alkaline. I said most of your other cells and tissues are slightly alkaline. So the idea behind it is that when they're in the proper pH, the cell functions at its optimal level. That means the cell can repair itself faster. That means there's less inflammation. So it's really about optimizing the body at the most basic cellular level. And when you think about how do you make your body alkaline that way? Well, it's really not about the pH of the food. For example, if you take lemon juice and I squeeze lemon juice on pH paper, it's actually very acidic. But when you drink lemon juice, as it breaks down in your body, it makes your body more alkaline. So it's really not about the pH of the food. It's about the net result of what that food does to your body. So in essence, you're trying to front load all of these foods that really make your tissues very alkaline and try to avoid the foods that make your cells very acidic.
So I have a question that I've always wondered and haven't gone so far into looking, but if the alkaline foods, if it's not like doing the pH test on the food, how are they testing to know if it's alkaline or acidic in your body?
Yeah, the easiest way to do it is to check urinary pH. So I tell people go buy pH paper at your local pharmacy. Everybody sells it. It's very cheap. And 30 to 60 minutes after you eat is, go pee on the strip and then look at your pH. And we try and target a urinary pH of 7.2 to 8. That'll give you a relative idea about what your body's doing, after you eat. Checking first morning urine pH isn't very helpful because you're fasting overnight. You make ketone bodies. Ketones are acids. So you're always going to be slightly acidic in the morning, and that's true for everybody. But that 30 to 60 minute mark after meals gives your body enough time to start assimilating, breaking down that first part of your meal. And that'll give you a relatively good idea about what your body's doing, not just with the food you're eating, but the supplements that you take and medications. You kind of get the net effect of what everything you're putting in your mouth is doing to your cell pH.
So are you seeing that if the body is off balance, is it because of diet, or is it an underlying thing like because I have Lyme disease or something like that, or is it kind of both?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. Of course, there's so many things that can influence cell pH, and it's not just food. If you've got underlying infection, if you've got other type of toxicity, all those can, alter your pH. And, even for my most diligent patients, who are really keen on their diet, they'll have moments where their pH is a little bit more acidic for, any number of different things, whether you're exercising, whether you're fasting, again, the type of supplements you take, how well you sleep, all of these are going to have an impact on your physiology. So we shoot for that goal of 7.2 to 8 on the urinary pH. We don't always get it, but if we see that you're fairly consistent over time, and of course, at the end of the day, it's really about how you feel, right? We want to see that clinical improvement in, whatever you've been experiencing.
Great. And then can you do a quick overview? So lemon, for example, is not what you would think it would be. Is there a general rule or a way to know which foods are acidic versus alkaline?
Yeah, the way I kind of break it down is sort of into 3 categories. Category 1 are, say, these are foods that are very alkaline forming. You can eat as much as you like. And fortunately, almost all vegetables fall under that category. So when you're eating a mostly plant-based diet anyway, you're probably likely to lean in that alkaline direction anyway. And there are some nuts and seeds and a handful of legumes that also fall under that umbrella. But really, almost all plants are alkaline forming. And, if you look into the literature, and of course, I'm going to forget off the top of my head, they don't call it alkaline diet. They basically talk about it's about the potassium sodium ratio. And I apologize, I'm forgetting what they call it, but they call it something slightly different. But basically, again, you're looking about whether your body breaks down more like sulfur-based products, more phosphorus-based products. Some of the more phosphorus-based breakdown products are more alkaline. The ones that are more sulfur-driven are more acidic, which is why meat can tend to be more acidic. So category 2 are foods I say you can eat, but you probably should limit it to about a quarter of your dietary intake. And that's all animal protein, and it's most fruit. Again, they're sort of on the neutral to slightly acidic side. And then category 3 are foods I said you probably shouldn't eat at all. And really, it's mostly junk food. It's processed food. All these are very acid forming because of the corn syrup and the artificial dyes and fillers and all the other junk that goes in food. It also includes dairy products. Dairy tends to be very acid forming. And the one that kills people is coffee. Coffee, unfortunately, coffee is very acidic. Of course, it's acidic by itself, but it also makes your body very acidic. So for my hardcore coffee drinkers out there, I said, look, there are coffees out there that are low acid coffees. And I have some people, if the rest of your diet's really very alkaline, that 1 cup of low acid coffee a day probably isn't going to have a huge impact. But if you're a hardcore coffee drinker and you're a 2, 3, 4 cup a day person, you got to monitor your urinary pH and just see, how your body metabolizes it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for breaking down those foods. And it's always so interesting to me that I feel like sometimes these diets, it's like there's different ways of looking at it and different lenses, but a lot of times it comes back to the same thing. And I love that the basis is like, hey, if you include more vegetables, you're going to be off to a good start. I feel like that's really the backbone of a healthy diet. So I love that that's how it breaks down. I want to shift a little bit away from the food for a minute because I know you are such an expert in the area of Lyme disease. And some people, not everyone listening is that's going to be relevant to, but I'm sure people are curious about that. So give us some ideas of if someone suspects maybe that Lyme is an issue, or when are you looking into it in patients?
Well, Lyme disease is the fastest growing infectious disease in the world. And in the United States, we've seen a significant growth of, a number of people that are being diagnosed with Lyme. In the United States, it's 456,000 new cases a year. That's new cases. So you can do the math and figure out every year we now have millions and millions of people living with Lyme. And unfortunately, the symptoms of Lyme often are very vague. People feel sick. They don't really understand why. But because this organism, it's a bacterial infection that most people acquire through a tick bite. The deer tick is the one that's mostly known for spreading Lyme disease. Now, down where you live in Texas, you've got Lone Star ticks, which are not known to carry Lyme disease. So places like Texas, Arizona aren't nearly as prevalent as someplace like Connecticut, New England. We now know that the eastern and western seaboard of the United States are pretty much covered with deer ticks. And so Lyme is quite prevalent. But, when you start getting, headaches and joint pain and fatigue and brain fog, sort of the two classic symptoms of Lyme is this bullseye rash. When you get bit by a tick, it looks like the Target logo. Unfortunately, very few people actually get that rash. So a lot of people who get bit by a tick that carries Lyme, they don't know because they didn't see the rash. The other symptom that's very characteristic is what's called migratory joint pain, where one day my right shoulder hurts, then my left knee, then my right ankle, and it just kind of seems to move throughout your body. That's very unique to Lyme disease. There's a lot of arthritic conditions out there, but none of them really cause that kind of migratory joint pain. But beyond those two symptoms that are sort of characteristic to Lyme, the other symptoms are vague. And again, they often get misdiagnosed as a lot of other things. So the big red flag for me is when I see a combination of neurological symptoms and arthritic symptoms. That really narrows the window down, and there's very few things that cause both.
Interesting. And backing up a little bit, but the huge increase, is it all to do with the tick, or is there something else going on that's causing this increase?
Yeah, the World Health Organization put out a paper a few years back, basically saying climate change probably is driving a lot of that. We used to count on cold winters killing off the ticks, and the winters just don't get as cold. We now learn that the ticks can burrow under the leaves, even if there is snow cover. They can basically find a warm enough space to survive. And so year after year, if you don't kill off the tick population, in addition to that, we know a lot of natural predators for ticks, their populations are dwindling. So the possums and the other animals that eat ticks, their numbers go down. Plus the migration of birds. With the warmer climate, birds, if there's a bird in Connecticut, tick hops on, now it flies somewhere to northern Canada, lands, it can now create a new tick population. So they think the migratory patterns of birds is also carrying ticks in areas that we didn't used to really think, were problematic for deer ticks. So climate change is really kind of the driving force we think behind a lot of it.
Interesting. So when you're seeing these patients with Lyme, is the alkaline diet something that you have to evaluate patient by patient, or is it just across the board? This is something that's always seems to be the way to go.
Well, diet and gut is always where I start, really, with any kind of chronic illness. I mean, that's sort of, I think, the cornerstone of good health. And for a lot of my patients, and particularly, again, if they're eating, what we call the SAD diet, right? The standard American diet, we're getting them off, processed food, junk food, getting them eating whole, real food, shopping the perimeter of the grocery store because that's where all the real food is. So is it appropriate for everyone? No. I mean, you've got to meet people where they're at. But the majority of my patients, I really encourage that they follow the alkaline diet. And again, I've seen it, for, more than 2 decades now that it really has a positive impact on the way people feel, eating that way. The other thing too is I see some of these other diets that are, keto diet, which is very difficult for people. It's way more restrictive. I think if we go back to our true paleo forefathers, I think this is the way that they ate. We weren't farmers yet. We foraged off the land. So we were eating mostly plant-based foods. We killed when we could, but you probably didn't kill every day. So animal protein was definitely part of our diet, but it probably wasn't the bulk. We were more foragers. So I think this really kind of speaks when we talk about a paleo diet, where I see a lot of the paleo people go is it tends to be very high meat, high protein, and not necessarily as many vegetables, where I think, the better balance is probably eating really still mostly a plant-based diet.
Okay. So you mentioned you're seeing patients with Lyme. What other types of patients are you seeing, and what sort of dietary interventions are you looking at with those patients?
Well, an alkaline diet, again, it's an anti-inflammatory diet. So it's appropriate really for any chronic inflammatory condition, which is pretty much everything, right? It's cardiovascular disease, it's rheumatoid arthritis, it's lupus. I see a lot of kids with autism, and often we're trying to shift their gears to have them eat more this way. And kids with autism, of course, is terribly difficult because a lot of them tend to be very picky eaters. I have kids that come in to eat 4 foods, right? It's mac and cheese, hot dogs, hamburgers, and pizza. And, trying to get them to add more vegetables and plants to the diet, it's a little bit challenging. But again, if you've got a child with autism that's got, or PANS that's got neural inflammation, brain inflammation, versus someone with rheumatoid arthritis where it's more confined to the joint, the fundamental problem is still kind of the same, is that you've got this pro-inflammatory condition. It's just a function of what is it that's setting that inflammatory process off. And more often than not, diet is a part of that. So again, if we get anybody off, junk and processed foods, we're going to see improvement in a lot of folks. But again, I like the idea of the alkaline diet just because I think it's sustainable. This is a healthy, well-rounded, very diverse amount of foods you can eat. It's not really restricting you on too much. Again, you can still have meat, you can still have fruit, you can still have all these things. It's really just about shifting the proportion of these foods, that you incorporate in your diet.
Yeah. And go over again. So if you're wanting to make that shift, how can people get kind of more information on how to do that and where to get started?
Well, I wrote a whole chapter in my book called The Lyme Solution on specifically an alkaline diet. So again, we go through all the nuts and bolts of what that really entails, has very specific lists of which foods are included in each category that I mentioned before. So that's a great resource. And of course, for people who really want to start that, I'd highly encourage that, they download the meal plan that you guys prepared, because you basically have given them a month start on how to make this diet work. Here's all the food you need to buy. Here's how to prepare it. I've got 2 weeks of recipes in my book as well at the back of the book. So, between your plan and my book, you've got 6 weeks of food to get started with. And it's really quite easy. I think people are always intimidated with making diet changes, but once they really kind of get into it, find it isn't terribly difficult. You can still eat wonderful, delicious, healthy food.
Yeah, no, and we'll make sure that we link all of that in the show notes. And I think for this, it's kind of one of those things you can, because I know back when we met up years ago, it was like, okay, kind of researched it, see what it is, understand it. But then once you have that basic understanding, like you said, I didn't feel like it was tricky or difficult or anything like that. It's just kind of getting that basic understanding. And then it really is kind of an easy guide to follow. So I feel like it kind of comes together. Is that what what are your patients saying when they switch over to this type of way of eating?
Well, what I love about it is that, people often feel the change pretty quickly. It's one of these things when you really start shifting, your body in the right direction, often within even the first, few weeks, people will tell me that I feel better, my gut's functioning better, I'm pooping better, my brain's a little clearer, I'm sleeping better. We forget sometimes, when you've got this inflammatory process going on, how much it impacts all these aspects of your life. People don't necessarily connect that, I'm not a good sleeper. Well, maybe that's because of what you're eating. I'm not thinking very well. Well, maybe that's because of what you're eating. And so all these little things that have become part of their life for so long, they don't even recognize, it's their normal. And so when they start to see that change, it's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea how much this was really impacting the way I feel. So it can be really profound for folks.
Yes, that's awesome. These interviews go so fast, and I feel like we could still go a lot of directions with this. But before we wrap things up, any final thoughts or things you'd like to share with the listeners?
If you're ready to start making any kind of dietary change, don't be intimidated. It doesn't happen overnight for a lot of people. Food, because it's social, because it's comfort, because it's such an emotional part of our life. Making changes takes time. Be patient with yourself, but start with the simple stuff. Make one or two small changes. If you're not a big vegetable eater, I'm going to add one new vegetable a week. I'm going to add one more portion of vegetables at dinner than I normally have. You can start really small, but you've got a goal that you're working towards. I think people feel like, it's go cold turkey and just go all in. And, that's challenging for people. So just be patient with yourself and stick at it.
And the chef in me just has to add, when you're adding those vegetables, just look for recipes that are delicious. I think a lot of times people treat it as like a chore, but it can really, if you flip it and think of like, oh, this is something I get to add, and find something that you really do enjoy. Because I think there's so many vegetables out there, so many recipes, so many styles. And so, if you can find ways to make it enjoyable, then it's all of a sudden it's going to be sustainable, because it's going to be something you want to do. So kind of being able to have that mindset shift is helpful as well. Well, Dr. Ingels, thank you so much for coming on. Let listeners know where they can find you. Do you do one-on-one work? If not, what resources do you have available?
Yeah, well, the best place to find me is just at my website. It's just dariningelsnd.com, and all of my information, social media links are found there.
Great. Thank you so much. And we'll make sure everything is linked in the show notes, the meal plans, all of that. Thank you so much, Dr. Ingels. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Allison.
Thank you, Dr. Ingels, for coming on. I hope you all enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. A reminder that if you want to try out the Alkaline diet, we partnered with Dr. Ingels to create multiple weeks of the Alkaline diet with lots of tasty menu items. And it just makes following the diet for a few weeks, if it's something you want to try, it makes it really easy to do. So again, that's at prepdish.com/shop. I'll make sure that's linked in the show notes. And a reminder that if you have been listening to the podcast and have not left a rating and review, if you're on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. It just helps more people to find these episodes, and I really appreciate that. That is all I have for this week. I'll be back again next week with another episode.